The next question says, when should we start testing in our project? So this is a good question, okay? It is a simple question, but it identifies is the person applying for this job understands the field well or not. So for example, if you answer this question in a wrong way, mostly you will not get a job, okay? So software testing should start early in the software development lifecycle. So from day one of the project, we should start software testing. Okay, once the client comes to our company and begins to tell us his requirements, the product owner or the business analyst begins to write them down, and you as a tester should focus on those requirements and try to find any ambiguities or contradictions in them. So the involvement of the tester early in software development lifecycle helps to capture and eliminate defects in the early stages of the software development lifecycle, like requirements gathering and design phases. Also, when you start testing as early as possible, this helps to reduce the number of defects and ultimately the rework cost in the end. We have 7 principles in the software testing field. One of them is early testing saves time and money. This is why we need to start testing as early as possible in order to save our time and money. This question can also come in a different form. He might ask you, how can we prevent defects from being introduced in our project? In this case, the answer is by starting testing as early as possible, by reviewing the requirements and reviewing the design. So when you review the requirements and the design, if there is any problem in them, you will prevent this problem from being introduced in the software itself, in the code. The next question says, if we don't have clear written user requirements, how can we test the software? So in many companies, you go and you ask about the SRS or the requirements, and the answer is the requirements is outdated, or we don't have any type of requirements, okay? Any type of written requirements. Everything is oral in this company. So what shall you do? So here you can do more than one thing. Let's talk about them in a simple way. The first is work with whatever little documentation you can get your hands on. So if there is a requirements document which is outdated, ask about it and read it, okay? If there is a prototype, if there is a UI design, anything, or some user stories or wireframes, gather those requirements and try to understand them in order to analyze the requirements and write your test cases. So this is the first way to work. The second is to use the older or current version of the application as a reference to test the future release of a software product. So for example, you are working on an application and we are going to develop a new version, okay? A newer version with some modifications. But this application already has an older version on the Play Store or a website, for example. In this case, you can refer to this old version and write your test cases based on it. And once the new version is developed, you execute your test cases on it and begin to refactor and maintain your test cases, because your test cases are outdated. They are built on the old version. This is not the best way to test a software. It is not a good thing to begin to write your test cases based on an old version, but it is the only possible way in this case. You can also talk to the project team members. So if you have, like we said, a product owner or a business analyst who has already sat down with the customer and gathered the requirements from him, you can know the requirements from him. Also, if you have a developer who worked on this project in the past, he can tell you some data that will help you in writing your test cases and testing the software. The last thing is to use exploratory testing to test the application when it is ready. So exploratory testing is an experience-based test technique, and it is very important, okay? It is used in many companies. After you say that you can use exploratory testing, try to explain it to the interviewer. Don't wait for him to ask you what is exploratory testing, okay? If you have knowledge, try to tell the other person that you know it, okay? He might not ask you what is exploratory testing, and in this case, he will not know that you already have some knowledge about exploratory testing. And that's what takes us to our next question: what is exploratory testing and why do we use it? So exploratory testing is an approach to software testing that is concisely described as simultaneous learning, test design, and test execution. So in our test process, we begin to learn about the software, write our test plan, then analyze it, then design our test cases, then execute them, okay? But what if, like we said earlier, we don't have requirements to analyze? What if we don't have enough time to test our software in a formal way? Okay, we don't have time to write the test plan, test cases, then execute the software. In this case, we use exploratory testing. In exploratory testing, test cases are not created in advance, okay, like the formal test process, but testers check system on the fly. While they are walking through the system, they are testing it. Why do we use exploratory testing? The first reason, when we don't have time to design test cases. The second reason, when there are poor or no requirements. So like we see here, in exploratory testing, we begin to learn about the software, then design our checklist or something that's called a test charter. We have a document that's called a test charter, and in this document we write a simple checklist in order to make sure that the items which are written inside this checklist are done or performed inside the software. Then we execute those checklists or the objectives that are written in the test charter. Then we analyze the status of our software and begin again to learn about other parts of the software. Sometimes exploratory testing is done using time boxing. And in time boxing, we begin to specify a session, okay? This session has a start time and an end time. So we begin, for example, to say we will test the login, register, and a contact us functionality, for example. And those three functions will take us one session, okay? This session will be 60 minutes, 90 minutes, or 120 minutes, which is 2 hours. And for each session, we have one test charter. In this case, exploratory testing is done in a way that's called session-based test management. Session-based test management, some people call it SBTM.